Hello, and welcome back to our live stream here on Ancient Egypt and the Bible, where we answer your questions on the Bible and Ancient Egypt. This is our 33rd live stream, 2022. Yeah, it's looking a lot like 2022 is much like a repeat of 2020. But I won't digress into that too much. A little bit of housekeeping before we start, which is that we have finished re-editing our video on aliens and the Lost Ark, and we are reposting it this Monday, and we're doing it as a live premiere again. The reason why we're doing it as a premiere a second time is we've added a lot more new content, as well as stripped out all the old nasty A&E copyrighted stuff. So you're going to get a different viewing experience this time than you did if you were fortunate enough to see it the first time. So we're actually kind of really looking forward to this because we do have some special stuff in there that we didn't have in the first video. So, with that said, we're going to get started with your questions, and the rules are the same as always, which is we take super chats. They have priority, but if you're not going to do a super chat and you still want to ask a question, begin your question with a Q and a colon, so I know that it is directed to me. And that way I know that answer that question. Now, one rule that I really want to sort of emphasize here is that only ask your question once. This is really, really important. If you ask your question multiple times, I tend to scan through the live chat looking for non-super chat questions. So if I encounter it multiple times, it really throws me off, and I can't tell if I've answered it or not. So I'm going to get really, really picky about that. And if I see questions done multiple times, I'm just going to ignore the question. Just simply put, I'm just going to ignore it so I don't encourage that behavior. So with that said, I want to wish everyone a happy New Year. This is our first live stream of the new year. It's wonderful to be back. And let's get right to it. So, let's get our first question up here. And we'll start with two non-super chats, because we always want to make sure that some non-super chats get answered. And we'll start with this one from Warrior of the Most High. What did ancient Egyptian pharaohs and viziers, especially in the early dynastic period and afterward, wear? Okay. Now, one of the things that we don't see actually a lot of significant changes in clothing over time in Egypt. And that's a lot of that is because clothing is specifically adapted for the climate. Now, we do find some changes. The king generally wore a kilt. He wore a kilt. He wore a headdress. That's about it. And that's what your average male typically wore in Egypt, was just a kilt. And not all males wore headdresses. Essentially, it was just the king who wore a headdress, and that's because it's just plain too hot. Now, we do find that the style of kilt actually slightly changes over time. One of the more notable things that we find, like for example, is the knot that's used to tie the kilt in, say, the Middle Kingdom period. It's this great, big, massive knot just in the center of their stomach, where the kilt's tied. This is one of the reasons why you can say, for example, tell what's a Middle Kingdom statue versus what's a New Kingdom or a early Old Kingdom statue, is by this big, massive, almost looks like a tumor in the middle of his stomach. But it's a knot that's used to tie the kilt together. So we do find slight changes in dress over time. But generally speaking, the king wore a kilt and a headdress of some kind to indicate he's the king. Now, the vizier wore a completely different garment. And he wore a garment that's really, really distinct from the rest of Egyptian culture, which is he wore this how do I say it? It's a linen robe that was cinched under the armpits. So it's like from the armpits down to his feet. So he wears this long robe. Now, nobody in ancient Egypt, no males anyway, wore a long robe like that. Only the vizier. So when you go to, say, like, for example, Rekhmare's tomb, and you see his image on the wall, he is wearing that vizier's clothing. So it's very, very distinct to the vizier. So you can easily tell who's a vizier and who's not just by that interesting style of attire. So, and that does seem to be the traditional dress for viziers, going way back, going to at least the Old Kingdom. So, early dynastic period, we don't actually have a lot of reliefs from the early dynastic period, so we're not quite sure what viziers wore during the early dynastic period, or even if there were viziers during the early dynastic period. But definitely for the Old Kingdom, we have records of viziers, and they wore that traditional dress. So, anyway, thank you very much for that question. Great question. It's an interesting question. And I thank you very much for being joining us tonight. Okay, our second non-super chat is from Chow Yi. Dr. Falk, what is your opinion of the use of icons in worship? Do you think they have any connection to idols from ancient times? Okay. Now, I'm assuming you're meaning, like, for example, the Eastern Orthodox use of icons in the church. Now, I understand that their use is extremely nuanced. And I'm not going to do their use of icons here a disservice. Now, their use of icons in their service is, heavily nuanced. Heavily nuanced. The Western approach to the iconoclastic view is that it is communicating with the dead. Now, here is how they explain it. So I'm going to try my best to explain their use of icons as they portray it, which is they're not actually praying to the icon or the saint, but they also think that the image of the saint is phenomenological, which means it has the power and the presence of the saint involved, and that they are asking the saint to pray on their behalf. Same way as you would ask, for example, like your friends to pray for you. They would also deny the charge that it's praying to the dead. Essentially, what they're saying is, well, all these saints are alive in Christ. Therefore, you're not praying to the dead. You're praying to those who live in Christ. And just like you would ask your friends to pray for you, you're asking the saints to also pray for you. So, as I said, it is very nuanced. Now, I still am sort of not comfortable with practice personally. Part of the reason I'm not comfortable with the practice is part of the reason we are forbidden to communicate with the dead. It doesn't say you can't communicate with the dead. There's nothing in scriptures that says that you can't communicate with the dead. It's definitely possible. It's just forbidden. The problem is we don't actually know who's saved or not. So I think this is one of those sort of gray areas where I take sort of a more cautious approach to. So, I mean, yeah, you can assume every saint is saved, but it may not actually be so. So, in a sense, I exercise caution here. So, it's not in any way connected to idolatry. It's definitely not idolatry. Not in any way, shape, or form. Does that make it acceptable? That's the whole sort of $1 million question. And that's just a matter of debate that I'm going to leave up to the personal conscience of the people who do or don't do. So, anyway, thank you very much for the question. And now we are going to get into a huge number of super chats today, which is just awesome. It's awesome. Okay. Our first super chat of the day comes from Avraham Ben Hayim. Hi, Dr. Falk. I will be seeing this tomorrow night, since as an Orthodox Jew, tonight is the Sabbath. Shabbat Shalom. I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to ask you questions. It's really appreciated. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. The super chats really help keep things going here. So it's a great pleasure to answer your questions. And we really do appreciate all the support you give us and give this channel. So again, thank you very much for the super chat. And yeah, I do know you have some other questions following, and we're going to get right into them. Okay. The next super chat is also from Avraham Ben Hayim for $4.99. Thank you very much. In light of Dr. Kip's article, will you be responding, and who are good biblical scholars to read and listen when it comes to this topic? Okay. All I'm going to say on that is there are still many admirers of the art of Conley in the Land's Rod. Okay? If you get that message, you'll understand it. Okay? I hope you're a Dune fan, but that's my response to this, is that the forms of Conley have been obeyed. Now, your second part of your question, who are good biblical scholars to read and listen when it comes to this topic? Well, there are actually many good scholars on this. Emmanuel Tove is a good scholar. Wasserman is a good scholar on this. Eldrick is a good scholar. There's many, many good scholars on this topic. But the problem is you have to use your critical thinking here to evaluate all scholarship. Okay? Here's the thing. Scholarship and consensus thinking within scholarship is not an excuse to turn off your brain. It's not an excuse to turn off your brain. All scholarship has to be held to the light and seen if it is actually true. If it is true, by all means follow it. If there's cause to question it, yes, then question it, even if it is the consensus. There are many things that are the consensus in the past that is wrong. And consensuses don't last forever. They're not eternal. They'll change with every generation. 40 years, biblical minimalism was the overwhelming scholarly consensus. It's still the scholarly consensus today, but it's less overwhelming. There was a time when the high chronology was the scholarly consensus. Today it isn't. The consensuses change. New evidence comes about. There's always change in scholarship. So I would recommend read widely. Read everybody. Don't just read anyone with I would say who's gone through the peer review process. If they've gone through the peer review process, even if they're an outlier, their opinion may still be worth evaluating. Read the consensus scholarships. The consensus is definitely worth considering. In many areas, I do follow the consensus. In fact, I'm overwhelmingly, a consensus scholar. But then again, too, if all you're doing is following the consensus, you're not making any new advances either. You're not challenging the consensus with new data or new theory. And the consensus is as I see just 501 Mobius say, consensus is not the final answer. And it isn't. It really isn't. But it is important. And I always consider the consensus, even if I ultimately say, no, it's not the case, or no, there's alternatives here. So anyway, I hope that gives you a good answer to the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. And the third super chat from Avraham Ben Hayim for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Are there any non-religious Egyptologists that believe in some sort of an exodus because of the evidence that we currently have? Now, that's a tricky question. And it's a tricky question because of the wording some sort of exodus. There are many, many different views on the exodus. You have the late date, you have the early date, you have the memorial view, which is a kind of Exodus. Like, for example, Donald Redford. Donald Redford is a non-religious Egyptologist. He also believes in the memorial view, and basically said that there wasn't a real Exodus per the Israelites, but it's basically the memory of an Exodus-like event, namely the Hyksos fleeing Egypt at the beginning of the 18th dynasty. So we do have some of those scholars, non-religious scholars, that do say that the Exodus may not be a real event, but it's based upon a real event. So that's under the some sort of an Exodus. Now, it is sort of true, though, and I will admit this very, 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 upfront, that most of the Egyptologists that do believe in an Exodus as a real historical event also do tend to have a religious, persuasion. Now, I think one that doesn't is Manfred Betock. Now, Manfred Betock has high respect for the Bible, and he does treat it like an ancient document, and he does think there was an Exodus. He's not a religious man. Okay? He's not a religious Egyptologist, even though he does have high respect for the biblical texts. So, just because you're necessarily non-religious doesn't mean you also say, poo-poo everything in the Bible either. So, it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum. It's a spectrum from those who, believe the Bible is historically accurate in every possible respect, to those who think it's complete fiction. And you'll find people going all across that spectrum. Now, with that said too, I also have to point out here that Egyptologists generally don't give the Bible much mind at all. Most of them don't care. So there are some, but generally Egyptologists don't care about the Bible because they're much more interested in dealing with Egyptian topics, especially hieroglyphs. There's a lot of Egyptian writing that's just really fascinating. So that tends to hold their interest more than some Hebrew text. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate that. Okay, our next super chat is again from Avraham Ben Hayam for $4.99. Is there any good sculptural basis to understand the conquest as a long and drawn-out process? God bless you, David Falk. Okay. Yes, there is. Now, when the conquest begins, they take a couple years to knock out the main cities. Okay? But it's after that where every tribe then has to bring its own inheritance under control. Basically, the first campaign of the conquest is really to soften it up. Take out the big cities that are going to have, destroy or capture. Most of them were captured. The ones that were going to provide the overwhelming opposition. Cities such as Hatzor, Jericho, Ai, the ones that are sort of, ones that will really sort of cripple the conquest. The ones in Heshbon are another example. Now, after that, they come back into the Judean foothills, and then they parcel out the land. And it's after they parcel out the land amongst themselves that each tribe is responsible for securing its own inheritance. And that's where sort of the long conquest comes in. It's that conquest that in many cases doesn't have an end point. It sort of bleeds into the period of the judges. So that's what we have here is roughly about a century of the Israelites, both gaining and losing territory as each one tries to secure their own inheritance. Some tribes are very successful at this. The tribe of Judah is very successful at securing its inheritance. In fact, it gets every city except for Salem itself, Jerusalem itself. Whereas the tribe of Dan is such an abysmal failure of this because of its own disobedience that it goes off and steals somebody else's inheritance because it can't secure it. So from just the text alone, we get this impression that it's a long time. It's a long period, decades, it's a course of decades and probably around a century that it takes for them to sort of establish themselves, their inheritance, and their tribal holdings at that point. So I think there is a good scriptural basis to understand it as a long drawn out process. There's also some extra biblical warrant for it as well. For example, the campaign of Merneptah in his before his 5th regnal year, where he basically campaigns in the coastal plain and through the Jezreel Valley into the Judean foothills. We would expect at that point that he wouldn't be encountering Israelites until he hits that Judean foothills, because his campaign just happens to coincide with when the tribes are coming back together to parcel out the land. So I do think there's a lot of warrant here for that. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, next one. Avraham Benheim again. Oops. That is there. There we go. Okay. Brick Creation for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate that. Okay. Hi, Dr. Falk. Do you think the flood of Noah was national or global? I'm still working that one out, honestly. My leanings tend to be more along the lines of global flood. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me when we go say a local flood. There's some things in the text that I just can't get past, but I also don't have the data right at hand either. So it's still something I'm working out. But with that said, I still think we can read the text as if it were as if it was global to them personally, even if it was, say, a more regional or area specific flood. So I don't think if it was a regional flood that necessarily disqualifies the reading for them. However, that said, I'm still trying to come to terms with this myself. And I'll continue reading. Comment more. I think that it was just a whole continent, but what do you think? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Also, do you agree with some things Answers in Genesis say about the flood? Thanks. No, I have great difficulties agreeing with Answers in Genesis about a lot of things. For example, they would use, say, a very literalistic, wooden literal reading of genealogies to basically said that the flood occurred in 2300 BC. This is about the same time as the Great Pyramid was being built in Egypt. So I don't think their chronology is very good. I don't think, say, their biblical exegesis is very good. So here's where I sort of am standing on this. I disagree with American young Earth creationism, and I disagree with evolution for essentially more or less the same reasons, which is bad biblical exegesis and is bad scientific reasoning. Okay? I think they're both appallingly bad options here. So, because of that, I haven't come to any particular decision on this. I do have some thoughts on this. I am writing about these thoughts, but I have not come to any conclusions yet. But I've got some grave concerns about how sometimes this topic is actually treated in the literature as well. So that's all I'm prepared to say about this, and very much thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Your very generous super chats tonight have gone a long ways to supporting the channel today, and I very much appreciate it. Okay. Another one from Brick Creation for $10. Thank you very much. Have you seen Truth Unedited's YouTube video, History of Religion Part 1? No, I haven't. This might surprise you, but I actually don't follow every YouTube channel out there. I don't read every book. I don't view every channel. I read voraciously. But even I have limits to how much time I have in a day. And unfortunately, some of this gets reserved to when I have time slices where I can do this sort of thing. So I don't have an answer an answer immediately for that first question. Do you agree to most of his claims about paganism, polytheism, and the story of Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz? Okay, I don't know what his views are on paganism, polytheism, and those stories, but I do have a few thoughts about some of those latter stories. Nimrod. I think Nimrod was a historical character. I don't know exactly which one. I'm still looking at that issue. Semiramis. Okay. That's actually was a real person. Semiramis was a real person. It was Queen Samut Ramat, who was the wife of Shamshi Adad V, king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. She was regent for her son, Adad Nirari III, and she was essentially the power broker and essentially ruler essentially of the Neo-Assyrian Empire until Adad Nirari III came of age. Now, later on, she became mythologized, but there's a real person behind all that. So we have to take that there's a real Semiramis and a mythological one as well. So I don't know what he had to say about it, but that's my take on Semiramis. Tammuz. Tammuz is one of the early myths from Sumeria. It works in with the Inanna myth. Essentially, how the myth goes is these Gala demons try to capture Inanna and bring her to the underworld. Tammuz is a shepherd god. He interferes and helps Inanna flee the Gala demons. Well, the Gala demons want someone in exchange. So they kill Tammuz and take him to the underworld. And Inanna decrees that Tammuz spends half the year in heaven, half the year in the underworld. And Tammuz is actually mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 8 as one of the pagan idolatrous practices where women weep for Tammuz. This was sort of the annual festival of Tammuz, where Tammuz is his death is mourned for I think it's 40 days, but I'm not sure. But there's a festival where he's wept for as he makes his transition from one half the underworld versus a heaven. So Tammuz is not a resurrection myth. It's not a resurrection myth. It's moving between planes. So that's my thoughts on Tammuz. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And next one is from, again, Brick Creation for $50. Thank you very much for that very, very generous super chat. Okay. Does the United Nations Peace and Safety Statue look similar to the beast in Revelation 13:1 and 2? No, not even close. The Peace and Safety, Peace and Security statue is a hideous looking thing artistically. It's absolutely a hideous thing artistically. It's ugly. It's basically it's a leopard or with wings. It's essentially what it is. Now, when we read the beast in Revelation 13:1 and 2, which says, and he stood on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard. Okay? And his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. Okay. Now, the only thing similar here, which is the like the leopard. That's it. The rest of it is and I don't think in any way. We don't see 10 heads. We don't see diadems or crowns or horns or even the paws of a bear. Okay, so I mean, it's an ugly thing. It's a hideous looking thing. It's a terribly aggressive thing, which, if anything, has its own sort of moral tale as well. That peace even can be have aggression and can be a wrong on its own. You know, peace is great. We all want peace, but peace at any cost can be a terrible thing. So anyway, to continue with Brick Creation's questions here. Can the heads, horns, and crowns be talking about kings, kingdoms, and provinces? Now, I think what the horns are this is essentially the disciples of the beast. Okay? You know, just like Jesus Christ had 12 disciples. Really, he had 11 true disciples. 10 is the defective number. 10 is the defective number of the 11. And 11 being the defective number of the 12. So what we have here is the 10 true disciples of the beast, and him, the beast, being the little horn, the 11th. Okay, so that's what's being symbolized by it. Now, we don't know anything about these, other than they are 10 rulers of some kind. We don't know what kind of rulers they are. It's a stretch to say they're kingdoms. I mean, it's always sort of suppose that, well, if they're kings, then they have to have kingdoms. Yeah, but we don't know what kind of kingdoms there are. One can have many types of kingdoms. So it's really sort of impossible to sort of divine here exactly what the meaning is. And then finally he asks, could it be a sign of the end? Well, you know what? We're living in the end days. We've been living in the end days since the ascension into heaven. You know, the Bible talks about, you know, these last days, and they're talking about during the lifetime of the apostles. We're always in the end days here. It's just that the end days are being filled out until the fullness of the Gentiles is complete. You know, that's the end days. And then the end comes. We can't be sure exactly when the end comes. And that end will be the fullness of the Gentiles, whatever that is. So, anyway, thank you very much. And I wish you a happy Sabbath as well. I know you were getting ready for Sabbath as well. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And have a great Sabbath. Hey, and let's see. Question. Okay, so we'll select it here. Okay. M Sharif 124 for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. Why hasn't a good candidate for Sodom and Gomorrah been found near the Dead Sea, unless we count El Hammam? Shouldn't ruins have survived and have been discovered by now? If not, why not? Thank you. Okay. Many reasons why not. Frankly, there's still some cities, some very, very important cities in the ancient world that still remain missing. And this is just sort of one of the facts we have to deal with when we deal with archaeology. Is we don't find everything, even if we expect to find it. Like, one of the big examples of this is the Middle Kingdom capital of Ichitawi. This was the capital of Egypt for 300 years. And yet we have no idea where it actually is. We've got some good guesses. Satellite, infrared satellite imaging has now given us a good guess where it possibly is, but nobody's excavated it yet. So this is just one of the effects of the archaeological process. Is sometimes we just don't find things until we sort of hit upon it or hit upon a reason why not. The city of Alexandria was essentially lost until divers started going off the coast of the Mediterranean and going deep down in the water to find it, because earthquake subsidence had taken the whole city pretty much and pulled it underwater. So, stuff like this happens. Sometimes we find things because of pure chance too. Sometimes a city is destroyed through future occupation. There's many actual good reasons why we don't find things. This is why we also don't do the absence of evidence arguments, is because too often absence of evidence arguments will force us to conclude that something doesn't exist when we just sort of haven't found it yet. So that's the reason that, and in the case of Tel El Haman, I think it's even in the wrong place. Okay. The reason I think it's in the wrong place is because in Genesis 14, the Mesopotamian coalition is essentially, they're attacking Sodom, and then they're going back to Kadesh, and then, they're coming right back the same way, which is through the south of the Dead Sea. So, when they're forced to flee Sodom and Gomorrah because they lose to the Mesopotamian coalition, they head into the tar pits. And we pretty much know where the tar pits are today. That much we know. We found the tar pits. So that much we know where they are. So that just leaves one or two questions. Is it a northern approach or is it a southern approach? If it's a northern approach, then you're having to, it would be really weird to have the coalition, attack, say the Sodom and Gomorrah kings, and then have to double back into tar pits instead of going up back into their cities. So there's some strangeness there. So my personal thoughts on Sodom and Gomorrah is it's in the southern region of the Dead Sea. So I just don't think we found it yet. Honestly, I think it's still there. I just think we haven't just, and that's true of many cities. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, M. Sharif for 124 for $10 again. Thank you very much for the super chat. You sometimes mention the onomasticum problem in your videos. Could you be a little more talk a little more about what it is? Yeah, sure, absolutely. Early in the days of biblical archaeology, a lot of biblical archaeologists were using what's called onomasticon lists, essentially lists of cities. And these onomastica were kept by, say, Byzantine scholars, record keepers. And what it was lists of cities, basically pilgrimage routes. These were pilgrimage lists. So when pilgrims came from Europe into the Holy Land on a pilgrimage, they would use these onomasticon lists to go from site to site, venerating various sites. Now, conveniently, almost all of these locations were by a road, by a major thoroughfare. So all they had to do was follow down the road to hit every biblical site mentioned in the Bible. Well, these lists have been proven to be very, very unreliable. In fact, they're almost worthless. So what the onomasticon problem is that later memories and later recordings of the locations of things may not accurately reflect what the ancient sites actually were. Well, we see this problem, say, in the names of Arabic villages. A lot of Arabic villages get their name off of previous sites, sometimes Egyptian name sites, sometimes Hebrew name sites. And what happens is that, well, towns sometimes move. Sometimes they have to move. Sometimes a water source changes, and the whole town has to pick up and move to a new site where there's a new well or a new spring. But they keep the name of the old city. So here's an example of, say, of an onomastica problem, where, you know, the new city has the same name as the old one, even though it's in a different location. Like, for example, Migdol. There's actually several Migdols in the northwest Sinai, and it was because the fortress picked up and moved to follow the course of the waterway. So there's a Roman period Migdol. There's a late Bronze Age Migdol. So this is there's even a Saite Migdol. So we do have to keep this in mind as we do, say, ancient geography. The names and the designations for ancient geography changes. It doesn't only change for cities, it also changes for regions. Like, for example, Arabia, the term Arabia. Today, when we talk about Arabia, we talk about the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the House of Saud. But when Josephus talked about Arabia, he's talking the Roman period Arabia, which is essentially from Saudi Arabia all the way across the Sinai to the eastern frontier of Egypt. So toponyms, that's place names, change over time. And the onomastica problem is one way that we see that reflected. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. 501 Mobius for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Deuteronomy 2:8 shows that Moses called the Arabah south of Dead Sea the Jordan Valley. This might change where we place Sodom and Lot's separation from Abraham. Sodom may have been found in this area. Yeah. I actually don't have a problem with this. I think this is actually probably spot on. I think it is south of the Dead Sea. Absolutely. I think that's where Sodom and Gomorrah were located. So I think this looking for it in the northern Dead Sea is kind of a fruitless pursuit. Now, I think there's some valuable archaeology that can come out of this. I think if the archaeology is done right, I think there's some incredible sites in the northern area of the Dead Sea. I just don't happen to think it's Sodom. So, here I agree with you. I absolutely think you're spot on here. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Saw some more here. Okay, M Sharif 124 for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Also related question: why aren't mentions of Sodom and Gomorrah found in contemporary records? For example, Ebla. Okay. The Ebla texts are frankly still being published. Not all of them are out yet. And the Ebla texts have a really jaded history of sort of bad translations. So I think that there does need to be some caution when we approach the Ebla texts. I think that we do really need to approach the Ebla texts not looking necessarily for biblical places. I think that mistake has been done repeatedly with the Ebla texts, where we've try to look for biblical sites, rather than try to translate the Ebla text on their own merit. Okay? Now, with that said, Sodom and Gomorrah would roughly date to the 18th century BC. Ebla trading range doesn't seem to extend that far. It does. There are Ebla does mention, say, cities around its sphere of influence, but it doesn't seem to go that deep. It doesn't even seem to go. Their trading relationships don't even seem to even extend as far as Egypt, as far as that goes. So their sphere of interest is almost entirely in its relationship with other large cities nearby, like Mari. So that's why I don't think we find either Sodom and Gomorrah in their records. I just don't think it's something that we can like really bank on. And even as far as, say, Egyptian records go, we wouldn't even expect to find Sodom and Gomorrah there, because it's before the imperial period of, say, New Kingdom Egypt. The imperial period essentially begins with Tutmosis III. And really, that's centuries after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So even then, we can't even expect to find it in Egyptian records, because it's just not something it's not someplace the Egyptians have a big interest in during, say, the Middle Kingdom and earlier. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Sometimes we just have to expect that we just don't have the evidence to show us things in a positive manner. So that's the limitations of biblical archaeology, in any archaeology. Archaeology can show us the presence of something. It can't really show us the absence of something. And right now we don't have the evidence for the presence of it. Okay. Frodo Jack for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Happy New Year, Dr. Falk. Well, Happy New Year, Frodo Jack. Any thoughts on UCLA researcher Kara Cooney and her new book on Egyptology and Kyle Rittenhouse, and how she gets it wrong? Ugh. Okay. I've met Kara. I know her. I have in the past. I don't agree with her politics. The Good Kings is essentially a sequel to her first book. I think it was called The Good Queens. And her first book was essentially a polemic of feminist politics. So she's anachronistically applying feminism to the Queens of Egypt. So a lot of people looked at that book and kind of go, yeah, I like feminism. I even agree with feminism, but there's a really anachronistic application here of it. I don't think it's good scholarship. And the fact she got the particulars of the Rittenhouse trial wrong to grind a ideological axe was irresponsible. She's very much in recent years taken a very activist bent. And there is a difference between scholarship and activism. I prefer that scholars remain scholars, and if you want to be an activist, be an activist. It's a very difficult balance to be both an activist and a scholar. So that's all I'm going to say on the matter. But I think it was dreadfully unwise. Dreadfully unwise what she did. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, and okay. Joseph the Wanderer for $5. Good to see you again, Joseph. It's been a while. Do love your little icon there. The blue bee. I love a little bit of a personal thing here. When I was finishing up my my PhD, I took up a little bit of beekeeping. Oh, I very much love bees. So anyway, okay. Quote, Exodus is fake delusion written by 37 different authors in the 1st century BC from Giggly Mesh. And by the way, did you know that Gerald Massey debunked all Christianity? Oh yeah. You know, the stupid thing is, you know, people do still argue this garbage. Yeah, people still argue this garbage, and it's just, you know, unbelievable. And this is why I sometimes take, you know, say a more derisive view of all this. Is because it's stuff that really, it defies all credulity, you know? And this is one of those examples that the whole Exodus thing is written by 37. I mean, look. I mean, the documentary hypothesis can. I mean, you can find continuous justifications to divide the text into ever more authors. You know, this is where we get strange stuff like Redactor D5. You know, and because the criteria is always growing, and it always does violence to the literary merit of the text. You know, I mean, I sometimes wonder if these guys have no soul or no mind, honestly, because it just sort of defies credulity. So, you know, no, I think we have pretty sound basis to believe that the Exodus, you know, is a legitimate event. I think it goes back. I mean, one of the things that Wellhausen used to say was prophets before Pentateuch. Essentially, the idea that there was the earliest writings in Israel were the prophets. Well, who's the oldest prophet in Israel? It's Amos. Amos, at least according to the documentary scholars. So, if Amos is the oldest prophet, what's he doing mentioning that God brought Israel out of Egypt? Well, it doesn't make a whit of sense. If in the 8th century BC, Amos is already talking about an Exodus. No, it can't be a myth concocted in the 1st century BC. It makes absolutely no sense at all. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Praise I Am for $4. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you. Did the Egyptians believe in evolution, aka slime? No. The Egyptians did not believe in evolution. They believed in special creation. They believed in that various gods were. They believed in, for example, multiple creator deities. Okay, you had Ptah, the creation god, the mummy-formed Egyptian creation god, that using his mind and his voice created the cosmos by pure act of will. You have the Ra myth, who was the sun god Ra was hatched from an egg from primordial waters and created through the act of, say, male copulation. You have the ram-headed god Khnum, who created mankind out of the clay on a potter's wheel. You have a variety of creation myths in Egyptian mythology, but what you don't find is evolution. It's not there. It's not in Egyptian. Evolution is a product of early modern Europe. That's where it comes from. So you just don't find it in Egyptian mythology. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and it's great to see you on my channel. Okay. Linguist Ammo for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. In light of the question posed by Abraham earlier, What would you say to those like Dr. Roser who think the conquest was genocidal? Hmm. I side here with a different scholar. Um, I've got him on the tip of my tongue. There's another scholar who basically says, and I'm just having a lapse of memory at the moment, who basically says that the conquest was not genocidal, but it was driving them out. Essentially, because frankly, they're not killing everybody. They are driving people out of the cities, off the land, but there are still Canaanites in the land. And the Israelites are told essentially, drive them out, but once you occupy the cities, don't marry them. Well, you can't intermarry with someone you've killed. If you've committed genocide, then there's no Canaanites there to marry. So I don't accept that it was genocidal. I do accept that they conquered the land to occupy the cities to essentially take over. They're essentially establishing the conquest as a new home. They destroy some of the cities, but not all of them. They occupy them. They'll eat the food off their table. They'll prune and harvest their vineyards. They'll press their olive oil. But the purpose is not genocide. The purpose is occupation. That's the purpose of it. I still wish I could remember the name of that scholar, but I'm just getting a lapse of memory. It'll come to me probably 3 a.m. in the morning. So anyway, that's basically would be my response to them. And yeah. I wish I could remember the name of that other scholar that basically takes the opposite view. So, I tried. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it, even if my memory is not always 100% perfect. So, did the best I could here. Okay. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And if I do happen to remember it during the live stream, I will talk about it. So. Let's see, who's next? Saahi Heather Newt for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you tonight. Must pay tribute to the Kitsats Redenbacher. May he shorten the ways to knowledge and popcorn. The popcorn must flow. Definitely. Yes, and Mr. Empty Conjecture will be back Monday. So I think we're all looking forward to seeing the Mana Machine again and Mr. Empty Conjecture. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Andrew Mansour for $10 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Doctor. I'm a cop. Fantastic. I'm glad you're here tonight. How accurate is it to say that the Copts are direct descendants of ancient Egyptians conquered compared to recent DNA research? Yes. There's definitely an argument to make that Copts are the direct descendants of ancient Egyptians. Okay. Now, it's also true that, say, modern Egyptians are a sort of a blend of people. They're a blend. They are a blend of the original Egyptians. They're a blend of Hellenistic Greeks. They are a blend of Arabs. They're also have some Cushite DNA, some Nubian DNA, some Semitic DNA. There's a lot of different DNA sources. Now, depending upon what village you come from, some Copts are, say, more true to that ancestry than others. Like, for example, Copts who basically, their entire ancestry comes from the Memphis area. are probably are more true-blooded as far as their pedigree goes than say ones that come out of Alexandria, just because there isn't the same sort of genetic interchange. Like the colonization wasn't quite the same. So there's more of a history there of, say, after the sort of the decline of Memphis as a capital in the Old Kingdom. Invaders had very little interest in Memphis. So as such, the Greeks never really colonized it in the same way they colonized, say, the Delta. You didn't have a lot of Semitic peoples going there. You had a few, but not as many. You certainly Arab in the Arab occupation had less of an impact on that area. So there's sort of you do have to take regional differences into account. You have to take all sorts of various different things into account. And I do think that there is some DNA research. A lot of DNA research is now being done, and I think we're still sort of processing that data. And I kind of hope that we do get to a point where the recent DNA research will be sort of better published and better expanded upon and better analyzed as well. That's not to say there isn't recent DNA research, but I actually don't follow the recent DNA research, basically for living Egyptians, as much as I follow it, say, the dead Egyptians, essentially the mummified remains we have from, say, the New period. So some of that is the fact that I just don't follow that literature as closely. So I'll plead partial ignorance there, but I really, really appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much, and very much appreciated. I'm actually going to go back to super chat where I could not remember that name because I finally remembered it. All right, I'm going to go back to this one because I finally remember. The name I would use here is John Walton. Okay. I knew it was rattling my head somewhere. It does take... I'm one of those sort of... just to give you a bit of information about me personally. I'm one of those... I'm an introvert, I'm also intuitive. So that sometimes means it takes me a little while to get information out of the back of my brain to the forebrain. So as such, it sometimes takes me a while. But so here on the Conquest, I would side with John Walton. So I think John Walton has a very good analysis of the word harem. I agree with his view on this, that the word harem, which is what's often used for destroy utterly. Utterly is not an adjective used there, it's just a translation. But I think the word harem here in respect to the Conquest narratives, because harem, ultimately, the earliest cognates we find in Akkadian, hiramu, means to separate out. So there's more than one way you can separate out, and this is how we get harem, as in the women that are associated with a king. They're separate. They're set apart. We get this, for example, with the Arabic usage of harem to mean the pyramids. It's a graveyard. You stay away from it. Set apart. For a destructive offering, it's harem because it is set apart for destruction. So, but it can also mean set apart as in to drive out. So I very much side here with John Walton here and his analysis of the Conquest. And I think it's a very, very good analysis, and I think it's well worth discussing, and I think it has a lot of traction. So anyway, I did promise I'd come back when I remembered that name, and I did. Thank you very much for the super chat again. Okay, let's see here. Okay, Christopher Larson for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. As an Orthodox Christian, I appreciate your respectful and nuanced discussion. Oh, I try to treat people fairly, you know, and some the Orthodox tradition is one I deeply respect. I'm not Orthodox myself, but I do really respect the tradition. So, and I do try to treat those I disagree with fairly and with nuance as I do it. Now, there's also some positions I don't respect, and I'm also not afraid to show that as well. But usually it's because bad actors are involved. So I do try to be respectful whenever it is possible and whenever it warranted. And I think the traditional teachings of the various branches of Orthodox and small Orthodox historic Christianity are worthy of respect in all cases. So absolutely, it's my pleasure to do that, and I think that's important to do. Now for my super chat. Thoughts on the identity of the Amalekites? They don't seem to show up in any extra biblical texts. Part of the reason is because the Amalekites are, first of all, they're desert dwellers. They do they don't show up in extra biblical texts because they're sort of it's a regional designation of desert cave dwellers that lived in the Sinai. And we don't actually have a lot of information of those dwellers, either from Egypt or even from, say, the conquest prisms of Ashurbanipal and Esarhaddon. While we do have tribes mentioned in there who are possibly Amalekites, we don't actually have a one-to-one correspondence with them. Because it does seem that the Amalekites are sort of a collective. They're a collective name for a large group of people. So I do think that that there might be a future finding there, but we're not going to be sure because again, we're talking about semi-nomadic people, tribal people that probably wandered the Sinai to some degree. And anytime you've got a tribe wandering in Sinai, tracing them down is going to be hard. Like, for example, the only reason we know about the Shasu, even though they were wandering, is because they had their home base in Edom. And they had villages in Edom, even though they did wander the Sinai from time. So, I think there is a lot here that that has a potential for future research. But we don't have any clues yet. We don't have any extra biblical sources for them. But I don't doubt that I certainly don't doubt that they existed either. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Vultius Catelius. Sorry. For $4.99. Okay. Oh. Okay. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I don't see a question there. It's a. Is there one? That's later on. He did one super chat for $4.99, retracted it, and now he's done another one. Okay, so, and we get right to the other one here. Another one for $4.99. Thank you very much. What's your take on Kip Davis's newest article on your views regarding Deuteronomy 32? That question has already been asked earlier in the super chat. And all I'm going to say right now is, again, I'll repeat what I said before, which is that the art of Canley has its admirers in the Landsrealm. Okay, so a Landsrod. So take that as a foreshadow of things to come. So anyway, you will get my there will probably be something coming. We've got something special planned. Okay? So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about it. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. And we got a super chat from the Dragon of the Mississippi River for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Could you do a review of David Rohl's Egyptian Genesis documentary or a comment his statement on the alleged Egyptian Paradise Isle in the Persian Gulf, please? Oh dear. Wow. I've already done a lot of material on David Rohl. It's hard to take this guy seriously. I don't know. I don't know what he's talking about here as far as a paradise island in the Persian Gulf. But we have to remember that David Rohl is a raconteur. He's a storyteller. He's a very good storyteller. But he employs a lot of fiction as a storyteller. So I think I don't actually want to do too much focus on any one individual on this channel, even if I disagree with him a lot. So I usually only do enough to show that the views are invalid. The views are untrue, unsound, and invalid. After that, I sort of leave the rest to the viewer to sort of figure it out on their own. Now, if it's something that's really, really pressing or needs further exemplifying, then I'm more than happy to do that. But I just don't focus on one individual. And one of the things we've done with David Rohl is we've done several Monday videos on David Rohl. We did a popcorn review of one of his interviews. So we do actually have a lot of material on David Rohl on this channel. But I'll tell you what, if we happen to be hard luck out of material at some point, but we do seem to get lots and lots of volunteers stepping up for popcorn reviews. I don't know what it is, but people just seem to want to be popcorned. I don't get it. But so we got lots of volunteers, and a lot of people recommend it, and we always take recommendations for popcorn review. Every video we've popcorn reviewed has been the result of somebody recommending. So, even the one that we're reshowing on Monday was a recommendation. So, we do love hearing your suggestions for what should be popcorn. But we also have to keep in mind that it can't be copyrighted material, or it can be material that we can reuse. If it's on YouTube already, it's usually pretty safe to popcorn review, although not always. Okay. So we do want to make sure that we follow the rules, because it is really, really painful for us when we have to pull a video and re-edit it and then re-upload it. So if this is a documentary that is, say, publicly broadcast or was paid on video, of course we can't. If it's an interview, that's completely different. Then that's sort of free game. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. We'll see. That's all I can say is we'll see. The popcorn keeps its own secrets. Popcorn never tells us what it will focus on next. It's got a mind of its own and a terrible, awesome power. More power than a mana machine. Right. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. That's it for the super chats. Let's go look for some non-super chats. Gonna go right up to the beginning here. One nice here. Okay, I'm gonna take this one from White Girl with Instagram Black Screen. Okay. There are verses in the Torah that mention Moses writing a something. Numbers 33:2, Exodus 24:4. Conversions of the documentary hypothesis fit with inspiration, i.e. Moses is one of the J-source authors. Later followers wrote E. Yeah. Yes, it's a yes and no thing. There are some versions of the documentary hypothesis that are consistent with the idea of inspiration. If the J source does extend all the way back to, say, the 13th century, BC, then yes. Its traditional rendering, which is that the J source begins in 950, isn't compatible. Okay. So in that particular case, the J source of the traditional Wellhausian documentary hypothesis is not compatible with the idea of inspiration. But that isn't saying that it couldn't be modified to extend all the way back to, say, the century. And in that particular case, then you'd have, let's say you modified the documentary hypothesis in that way. You could say J source is by Moses, and then the later followers wrote E, and they're also inspired. So in that case, you can make, say, a nuanced version of the documentary hypothesis that could do that. And actually, I don't have a huge problem with that, honestly. Okay? The problem starts coming into how the documentary hypothesis tries to reconcile those sources. Because, first of all, I do accept that multiple sources went into the making of the Pentateuch. And you see this in the authorship of the Pentateuch. You'll see like a section in, say, Numbers where it says, or Deuteronomy, Leviticus, where it says, Moses wrote, and it gives this huge chapter. I have no problem saying that, Moses wrote in that big, long, chapter-long section was one document from Moses. I have no problem with this. I think that the Pentateuch was written over a 40-year period, not in one sitting. So I think it is a collection of documents that are essentially concatenated together with just simply, Moses wrote, or God told Moses. And I think that's really evidence that what we're dealing with the Pentateuch is an archive of documents, not just a single document, a single sitting document. So I think there are ways the documentary hypothesis could fit with inspiration. It's when, say, more the traditional view of the documentary hypothesis is sort of doubled down on that we start getting problems. Like, for example, if they're absolutely going to be forceful about the 950 BC for the J source, then what happens here is that, well, the inevitable conclusion from that is that there was no Moses. That the Yahwists wrote the stuff in Moses' name as an elaborate fiction, and therefore there was no fiction. So, with that said, it's a little bit of a tempest in a teapot. The documentary hypothesis, as much as I disagree with it, I do disagree with it just because I think it's wrong. And I think its justification and methodology is wrong. I also don't think it's that harmful either. And as you rightly point out, some versions of it could fit with inspiration. And some versions of it are not necessarily incompatible with the existence of Moses or an Exodus. But it's some versions, not all versions. So I think this is really, really sort of, again, if you apply nuance, if you're flexible with how you read the text, like, for example, a lot of, say, fundamentalist readers will read, say, Jesus talking about the law of Moses and infer from that it was all written by Moses. Well, no, it wasn't. Even the very last chapter of Deuteronomy talking about the death of Moses. Well, he wasn't writing his own death. Somebody else wrote that. But that person is as equally inspired as the rest of the Pentateuch. Even though we know this was written by somebody other than Moses. So I think it's very, very important to keep this in mind. So I think there's a lot of, again, absolutely, I would agree here that it's possible. My difficulties with the documentary hypothesis is not on its implications for the text, but on its factual rightness or wrongness. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Interesting non-super chat. Very much appreciated. Oh, and by the way, great reference to the episode 33 in Battlestar Galactica. Really love that. I wish I had thought of that. Okay. I see we got another super chat here. Okay, from Tony G. Which pharaoh was Solomon's father-in-law since he took a daughter of Pharaoh as his wife? 1 Kings 3:1. Okay. That would most likely be, let's double check here, the pharaoh Siamam. It would be the most likely pharaoh that Solomon lived roughly 969 to 930 BC. That's his rough dates. There's some room there because the idea that he reigned 40 years. There's some thought there that he wasn't a full 40 or could have been over 40. So there's some wiggle room in those dates. But the pharaoh that lived at roughly the same time as Solomon was Siamam. And that's probably the most likely candidate. His dates are 980 to 961 BC. So, Siamam comes to the throne first, and then dies before Solomon does, and at that point, we then get Sisenes II coming through the throne. Now, it is possible it could be Sisenes II as well. That's also a possibility. So it's either Siamam or Sisenes II. But it's also this also is credible as well. I want to state this too. There's a lot of people who say think this account is fiction, because the Egyptians never gave away their daughters to other kingdoms. But we also have to understand at the time of Solomon, we have the Dynasty 21. These were kings of Dynasty 21. And it's a regime that's falling to bits. It's falling to pieces. Siamam's reign is so badly documented that we don't have a single document of his, single stela of his. Got a few stela of Sisenes II, but it's not good. It's really evident that his is a kingdom in extreme crisis. And it's an extreme crisis to the Libyans. The Libyans are just running roughshod over Lower Egypt. So the Egyptian court at this point is desperate to make new allies. They're desperate to make new allies, and they really, really want to shore up this failing regime. So I think there's definitely, it's very, very credible that at this particular point in time, and probably only this particular point in time, that the Egyptians are so desperate for allies that they'll even give a queen, a daughter of Pharaoh, to some Judahite chief, some Israelite chief, just to get some sort of support, so that at least they don't have to worry about conquest from the outside. Because one of the things in the bargain here, if you've got a exchange of treaty wives, is that Solomon will defend his borders, so that anyone incurring from the north won't be a problem for Egypt. So I think that's a lot of the impetus behind this sort of gift of a daughter, is to ratify a treaty to protect their north flank. So it's very strategic, and I think it's a last desperate move to keep the regime afloat, which ultimately fails. So we do have very much here a good at least context for that story actually being true. Okay, I see another super chat here from Tony G from $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat, much appreciated. Okay, what is the context and meaning of recruiting the maiden Abishag the Shunammite to help keep elderly King David warm? 1 Kings 1:1-4. He did not know her, but was he expected to? Yes. Okay. What we're talking about here is ancient Israelite and Canaanite culture here. And it's probably best explained through tavern culture. Now, the way tavern culture worked was in the ancient Near East. The taverns were essentially not only drinking establishments and food establishments, but they also gave you a prostitute who would keep you warm and you would have relationships with. And this was true in taverns in ancient Israel as well as the rest of the ancient Near East. So it was a form of sort of culturally accepted prostitution. Was it a violation of the commandments? Yes, but culture sometimes rides roughshod over religious law. And so we come to expect that when we approach a text like this. So they recruited this maiden, who essentially would act in that capacity of essentially sleeping with the king. Somebody to keep his spirits up and to keep him warm in his old age. And culturally, he would have had the option to know her in that sexual way. But he didn't. He wasn't expected to. It was an option. It's always an option. These are not the in that tavern culture. They weren't expected to avail themselves of the prostitute, but it was there and it was available. So, now there's another cultural dynamic going on here. That's just half of it. The other half of it is that if he didn't know her, that she could then be used to usurp the throne, being at least connected in that, whether or not sexually the sexual act is done, she's now connected as a wife or a part of David's harem. And to overthrow the next king, she could be set aside and married to somebody else. So I'm sure there were some people in David's court that were conniving, as it were, to overthrow Solomon, who had already been declared the crown prince, and essentially probably had a co-regency going on. So there's also that cultural aspect to the story as well. So we do have to keep in mind here that there's several cultural dynamics going on here, and it's a twofold thing. One of these was for David's benefit. The other one was for the benefit of any future usurper. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, that's the end of the super chats again, so we can take some more non-super chats. Go way up to the top again because I want to do that. Hey. Let's see here. I'll take Nathan Yadon's question here. Dr. Falk, what's going on at Tanis? Are they finding cool stuff? Yes, they are. And they're not telling us. There is Tanis is currently a site of active excavations. I was there in early 2021 when they were doing a excavation there. I was there in January, and they are finding stuff. I saw, for example, they were. It looks like they were excavating a granary when I was there. And it's a granary that seems to have then been used as some sort of fill site as well, because you could see some very clear stratigraphy there. They were also doing more excavation around the area of the tombs of the kings. That they found the Dynasty 23 kings that they found. So there's more excavations going on in the Royal Cemetery area as well. So there's a lot going on at Tanis right now. I wish they would put in better plumbing at Tanis, but they haven't. Terrible site if you want to go visit, but it's also a very fascinating and interesting site too. So let's just say the only toilet in Tanis is a squat toilet, and all the fun that comes with that. So I hope you don't have mummy tummy when you go visit there, because it will not be a fun experience. So anyway, they are finding cool stuff there, and there's a lot of cool stuff there, but publication is slow there as well. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. Interesting question. Okay, see here, I do see another one. Super chat at the bottom. RG Strategy for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Any new discoveries? I have not seen anything online yet. Hopefully 2022 will bring in just as good discoveries as 21. There were a few really good discoveries in 2021. There was a mortuary temple for an Old Kingdom Egyptian queen found. So that was very interesting. There was some excellent tombs found this last year. Some great tombs. Again, publication, waiting for publication, because, until publication comes out, you just don't have the goods in hand. But they did a excavation of a tomb at Saqqara of the finance minister of Ramses II. Beautiful tomb, elaborately decorated. When that goes into publication, it's going to be awesome. Absolutely awesome. There's some great stuff coming out of Saqqara right now. There was a stela of Apries. Now, this one's really exciting. A stela of Apries was discovered in 2021. And what's really fascinating about this is and it was found in the Wadi Tumilat. That's why I keep saying this. There's lots of great stuff coming out of the Wadi Tumilat. But this stela of Apries is the first extra-biblical attestation of King Apries. So, absolutely fascinating. So we've got yet another confirmation of somebody mentioned in the Bible, and this time an Egyptian king, that finally is that is found, that another one sort of bites the dust here. So we can no longer say that Apries is a myth. We've got extra biblical attestation of it, and this time in a nice big beautiful stela. So that's wonderful too. So so yeah, there was some really great stuff this year. Hopefully, and frankly, one of the things that's slowing this down is the pandemic. So as the pandemic sort of subsides, and there'll be more excavations happening in full force. So we can be very hopeful that we get back on track with digging, excavation, and most of all, publishing in 2022. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Great to see you again tonight. Wonderful question. Okay. Let's see. Purple Pill Philosophy says hi. Hello. Good to see you. Let's see. What's his question here? Okay, I'll take that question. You gonna do movie reviews? No, I'm not. I'd love to do movie reviews, because I think there's some really interesting stuff in the movies. And the ones you mentioned are all great candidates. Stargate, Land of the Pharaohs, The Egyptian. I'd love to do The Egyptian. The Ten Commandments, Cleopatra, The Mummy Returns, Ark, etc. Yes, we would love to do movie reviews. They are unfortunately also vigorously protected by copyright. And the owners of those films are incredibly litigious. We tried to do one for the Ten Commandments, and we stripped it down to barely nothing. We got one copyright, hit on that. We edited it dramatically, uploaded it again, and got a second one. At that point, it was just like, okay, if we take it out, there's not going to be anything left. We're still thinking about how to approach the whole topic of movies and popcorn reviews, because we would like to do it, because I think there's some great material that can have comments on. Like, for example, I'd love to do one on the gods of Egypt. I think that would be a fantastic popcorn review, because there's so much in there that's just appallingly bad. Appallingly bad. The Exodus, Gods and Kings, also appallingly bad. So there's things here we would love to do. We'd love to engage some of this more fictional material, but fictional content has greater copyright protections than nonfiction. Although we've seen in actual practice, it's practically the same. Which is that the nonfiction material is also rigorously. It would get in. We would have to probably get into some legal fights, and we just don't have the financial clout to get into a 5 to 6 figure copyright fight where we might not even win. To be honest. So, One Mobius says, movies need the help of sock puppets. Oh yes. Oh yes, they do. E. Heather Newt says, Gods of Egypt was a bad movie, but that doesn't mean I won't binge watch it 5 times in a row. Oh boy. I have to admit, there are some terrible movies that I like to binge watch too repeatedly. Starship Troopers. Oh my gosh. The fact is that's a very underrated movie, but it's very kitsch, and it's intentionally kitsch, and frankly, I love binge watching it because it's just it's funny. It's funny, it's entertaining, and it's actually got an interesting it's making fun of it's satire on military propaganda. 1980s Dune. Yes, that one too. I love that film. Absolutely love the 1980s film Dune. It's just visually it's sort of really out there, and at least it tries to portray the size of the narrative. That's one of the things is, even though, say, the Dune from the science fiction channel was truer to the script, it just couldn't capture the size of everything that's happening there. It's a epic that sweeps across a million worlds. You should get that everything is huge, everything's bigger, the future's really different. And at least the 1980s Dune try to capture the alienness of the narrative. So yeah, absolutely. Actually, to be honest, that Dune is one I'd love to popcorn review. I'd love to be able to popcorn review, because there's so much references to religion and to ancient Near Eastern culture in Dune. It would be absolutely incredible to critique it just on that level as an ancient Near Eastern specialist. I think that would be phenomenal to do, and it would be highly educational. Highly educational. Again, copyright. I don't know how much we'd be able to do, but we'd love to do that, because that would be just really interesting and really fascinating. So, thank you for the question. Yes! Oh, absolutely. Okay. Sean Horton, good to see you, friend. For $15. Thank you very much for the super chat. Are there any books that focus on ancient Near Eastern literary patterns that you'd recommend? Yeah, actually, I would. It was an author I actually mentioned earlier in this live stream, which is John Walton. John Walton focuses on this intensely. He very, very much discusses ancient Near Eastern literary patterns, ideas of mythohistory. He wrote a series called the Lost Worlds. So he'll do like the Lost World of Genesis, the Lost World of Conquest, the Lost World of the Exodus. And I think that those are incredibly good and helpful books for understanding the literary patterns. You know, because literary patterns are all over the place. They're all over the place in these things. Like I think last week someone asked me about the Egyptian word for reeds, suf. How we find that literary pattern. Oh, first of all, in Exodus 2, you know, where Moses is placed in suf, basket made of suf, put between among the suf reeds. And that's a foreshadowing of the Yom Suf. It's a literary pattern. So there's some really, really awesome literary patterns. And there's a lot of literary devices. I would also recommend the books of Robert Alter too. I think he does two books, The Art of Biblical Poetry. The Art of Biblical Poetry is an absolutely essential book for understanding ancient Near Eastern poetry. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. He also does one I think called The Art of Biblical Narrative. I don't think that one's as good, but it is helpful. So, there's a couple of recommendations. And I'll read the final super chat here, which is so far only seen a few sprinkled in from time to time in what I've read. I would like to know more. Okay, so there's two authors that I've recommended to you: John Walton and Robert Alter. Robert Alter will take, say, a more, say, secular critical approach than, say, John Walton. But it's good to have both sides. Good to have both sides, and it will sort of inform your reading as you go back and read the Bible for yourself. But I would do highly recommend Alter's Art of Biblical Poetry. Absolutely fantastic. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And it's good to see you again. Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to look for another question. Let's start from the bottom this time and work my way up. I will take here John Rufus's question. And he said, how did ancient Egyptians brush their teeth? That's if they did, laugh out loud. They didn't brush their teeth. We do actually, there is an early Egyptian toothbrush that was found, but it's Hellenistic. It dates to the time of the Ptolemies. But prior to that, they didn't brush their teeth. And part of it was their diet. During, say, the Middle Kingdom, the diet of Egyptians change. What we see is in Egypt, during, say, the Egyptian New Kingdom, we start seeing date palms being planted and consumed in Egypt, the dates. And this caused, because they're high in sugar and they're sticky, it caused a lot of tooth decay. So date eating became associated with tooth decay. But for most Egyptians, while there was tooth decay, it wasn't on the same degree because dates weren't consumed quite as much. So with less sugar in their diet, they had less tooth decay. Now that said, Egyptians had lots of tooth decay because they did eat dates. But they didn't brush their teeth. That's a much later development. So anyway, that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Okay. Let's see, what else do we got? Oh, 501 Mobius got another question here. Did Egyptians shave all their body hair? Yes, they did. Absolutely. They shaved all their body hair, and it was for lice control, essentially. Lice was very, very bad in Egypt. They didn't always shave though. We have say in the pre-dynastic period, lice combs. There's lots of finds of ivory lice combs, but by say the early dynastic period, we start seeing razors being found in amongst tomb remains. So at that point, it seems they sort of transitioned from lice combs to shaving. And we do know that both men and women shaved off all the hair. Only children, and really only small boys, kept the side lock of hair. That side lock that's found in a lot of really. But they shaved that off when they hit puberty. So both men and women shaved off all the hair. Women would wear wigs, and kings would wear false beards, but everyone else was clean shaven, and they would do so for ritual purity and to maintain cleanliness from lice. So that's the answer to the question. Thank you very much for the question. Okay, got 10 minutes left here, so I'm going to try to take a few more non-super chats. Let's see what here. Okay, Warrior of the Most High. Biblical writers had a kind of geocentric, flat Earth view of the cosmos. Well, sort of. It's more of a slice than a flat Earth view. It's not really a flat Earth view. It is the idea that the Earth was established on 4 pillars, and beneath it was a primordial sea, and above it was a primordial sea. Is it a problem for Christians? No, it isn't. And the reason why it's not a problem for Christians is because it's an analogizing of a worldview. It's using analogous language. The fact is, it's only a problem if you're reading this literally. It's a when we see these views of the cosmos, it's a way of trying to relate their world with things they knew. Like, for example, when the flood happens, it's said that the windows of heaven open up and the water poured out. It started to rain. Well, the window is not a literal window. It's analogical language. It's like a window, how it opened up and started raining. We see analogical language used all through the ancient Near East. They talk, like the Egyptians talk about, the passing from life to death in a tomb as though walking through a door from one room to another. This is why you find false doors in all the tombs. Is that a problem for the idea that the Egyptians believed in death? No. Or that people went to the afterlife? No, it doesn't. It's just an analogy used to explain it in a certain way. So when the biblical writers had this sort of a geocentric it's more of a slice view than a flat Earth view. Because, the fact is that the idea of, say, the Earth as a circle can also mean a globe too. So it's more of a kind of a sliced view than anything else. But, it's not going to be a problem for Christians because, we are reading it on its terms as analogies, trying to express something bigger through a literary device. But this is also why we have to take into account, say, literary devices when we do read. Because otherwise, if we start reading things too literally, then we get into trouble. And you just don't want to start reading things that way. Because it's just, then you're creating problems that you don't need. Whereas if you read it in the way it's intended to be read, it's no problem at all. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Great question. Okay. Okay, Kumar B asks, are there any ancient garbage dump sites that need to be excavated in Egypt and Israel? Probably. Garbage sites are found everywhere. You know. Wow. There was several years ago. Fox News had made fun of a university course called The History of Garbage. Now, this was a course that was delivered at a Maine university, and the complaint here was that, well, why are we sending kids to school to at $60,000 a year to learn about garbage, and they mocked it as sort of an act of, say, liberal elitism, etc., and wasteful university spending. But garbage is incredibly important for the archaeologist. It's our primary means of learning about the ancient world. Basically, the stuff people don't need anymore and throw away is the gold of archaeology. Archaeology is nothing but sifting through old people's trash. Stuff they don't need anymore, stuff they threw away, stuff they abandoned. This is the bread and butter of archaeology. So for an archaeologist, the history of garbage is incredibly important. It's how we establish a lot of history, is through remains that are just thrown away. Oxyrhynchus was a garbage dump. It was a great big garbage dump full of mummies and thrown away papers. But those texts, of which there are about 2 million of them, form a lot of the basis of our modern understanding of Koine Greek. Because prior to Oxyrhynchus, people thought that Koine Greek was a magic language that was unique to the Bible. Oxyrhynchus showed us that Koine Greek was just common Greek. People just spoke. And it had its own meanings and own particular history. The ostraca pit at Deir el Medina was a garbage pit. We found 1,300 ostraca there. An ostraca is basically a potsherd with writing on it. It was a garbage pit. A great big garbage pit. But it's also our most important source for a lot of Egyptian history. We got a sense of what village life was actually like for a sequestered artisan village. We got a sense of Egyptian economics through it. These were the people who also built the tombs of the kings. We found out what their life was like through these ostraca and these notes. We got a sense of their attitudes, a sense of all sorts of different things. There is, the garbage is important. It's absolutely important. It's incredibly important, as I say, for certain fields. Archaeology is one. History is one. These are important. Even if you were to be, an engineer for sewage systems, might be helpful there too. There's a lot of fields where this could be potentially important. Now, Israel also has garbage dumps. Like, for example, like one of the ones they're sifting through right now is the fill dump from the Temple Mount. When the Waqf carved out the mosque under the Temple Mount, they took all that debris and threw it outside. I don't remember. I think it was the Kidron Valley they threw it in. But there have been people now that have been sifting through that debris. And they're finding all sorts of interesting stuff. They're finding bulla there. they're finding, and Bulla is a clay seal with like for example, they found recently they announced son of Immer. Well, this is a biblical name. This is one of the names found in the Bible. So we're getting a lot of incredibly interesting information on garbage dumps. So I'm sure we'll find more garbage dumps, and that's great news for archaeology because it means there's more stuff to discover. So anyway, thank you for the question. Great question. Okay. Let's see if there's a more here, and we'll probably take one or two more questions and call it a night. See if there's something interesting. I always like interesting questions. Here's a question from SwiftC. What are your thoughts on Dr. Tremper Longman's Confronting Old Testament Controversies? I haven't read it. I do like Tremper Longman's work. I've read some of his commentaries. I'm a great fan of Tremper Longman, but I have not actually read this book. But it sounds like a very interesting book. As I said, I haven't read everything. My reading list is long and backlogged. Again, one of the sacrifices I make on this channel is I don't always get to do as much reading as I want to do because I'm making content for my subscribers to enjoy and learn from. So I have a long list of things I do need to read. So you'll have to forgive me if I don't read everything or have read everything. So don't know, but the author has been reliable in the past on other things. So thank you very much for the question. Okay. Okay. Won't take that because I've already taken a bunch of his questions. Warrior of the Most High does have some very interesting and provocative questions. I don't want to favor one too much here, so I've already taken two of your questions tonight, but I'll say that one on the Australian quote pyramid's fake. We'll just leave it at that. But one more. Call it a night. I'll take this one from the Anabaptist. And this will be the last, definitely last non-super chat and probably the last question of the night, too. All right. The Anabaptist asks, what are your thoughts on the third intermediate period of Egyptian nation and why Egypt never recovered to the level of power and influence that as the new kingdom? Okay. I think a lot of it boils down to the fact that the rule of Egypt during the third intermediate period was divided. So it ceased being a unified kingdom. You had the Theban priests to the south. They pretty much ruled essentially more or less from roughly Minya south to Kush. In the north, in the Delta region, you had several different dynasties of Libyans ruling at the same time. So they were a divided nation. So not one person was ruling all of Egypt. You had many kings ruling over many parts of Egypt at that same time. So this made them particularly vulnerable to foreign invasion. The first foreign invader was the Assyrians. The Syrians under Ashurbanipal and Esarhaddon just smashed Egypt. They destroyed temples, stole the gold, destroyed infrastructure. They just, pounced their way through it, and while they were eventually thrown out, it was very, very difficult for them to sort of rebuild things. You then had the invasion from, say, Nubia, the 25th dynasty, that then sort of threw out the Libyans entirely, and now you had a temporarily, and very temporarily, a very, very strong Nubian dynasty over Egypt. That's your 25th dynasty. And the Nubians had a very long reach. They reached almost all the way up to Kadesh. So it was that particular dynasty was very, very strong, but it was very short-lived. It only lasted for about a century. And then the Persians came. And the Persians made the Assyrians look like teddy bears. The Persians were really, 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 really nasty. And they came through Egypt like a hurricane. Just destroyed everything in its path and were really brutally repressive to the Egyptian population. So much so that when the Persians were ultimately overthrown by Alexander the Great, the Egyptians were seen as liberators. The Greeks were seen as liberators. The Greeks were seen as this, hey, anyone's better than the Persians. And after that, it was a complete Hellenistic rule until the Roman period. So, again, essentially, what happened was, you had a divided kingdom, and as Christ said, a kingdom divided against itself can't stand. And that's essentially what happened to the Egyptians, third intermediate period. You had a divided kingdom, and it couldn't stand up against, say, its own internal squabbles and weaknesses versus, say, powerful conquering imperial powers. So anyway, that's why no kingdom after the New Kingdom had the same sort of influence. It just did not have the control over the country as, say, the New Kingdom did. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and that's going to be our last non-super chat for the night. But we have one more super chat I see, and Sean Horton, and that. This will be our last question for the night. Sean Horton for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. And let's see, as someone who reads more than me, how do you take notes? If you do, I have 67 pages of notes on my current book, and I've read only 218 pages so far. That's not showing off. It's a cry for help. You sound like my wife. Okay. Well, my wife, when she reads a book, she'll have like 60 pages of notes when she's done. She'll do research and she'll come up with 200 pages of notes for a 12-page academic paper. And they're beautifully done notes, absolutely beautifully done. But it's almost it's so difficult for her to sort of sift through when she comes down to writing a paper. Now, I don't take notes that way. I do something completely different. Hope I have an example. Okay. This is not the best example. When I take notes, I do something very, very different. And I'm just using here Umberto Cassuto's Biblical and Oriental Studies, Volume 1. Okay? And what I do is when I go through something, here is very, very simply, I underline the book. Now, you probably can't see it. It's in red. It's right there. Okay? And then how do I take the note from that? Almost at the front of almost every book that I own, there's a convenient white page, or sometimes the cover, depends. What I'll do is I will make a small notation of the page, and then a brief abbreviation of what the material is that I underlined. I've gotten used books and I've seen a lot of underlining in books. That's okay. That doesn't bother me one bit. I don't actually need a pristine copy when I go. But I've almost never seen anybody make a reference in that blank page at the front or the blank pages in the front where you can actually go back and then later look it up. It's an incredibly useful system for taking notes. And I do that whenever I take notes. It's just, you know, the briefest abbreviation of what the content of the note is and then underlined on the page itself. So I have always one place inside the book where I can always then reference back all the other notes. So I understand that this is a cry for help, but that's my system. Do whatever works for you. If what works for you is to take 200 pages of notes or 67 pages of notes, it may be the best for you. It depends. A lot of this will depend on what sort of personality type you are, what sort of learning style you have. So I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all deal. But I have what works very, very efficiently for me. And, you know, for some people, some people need to take that volume of notes. Because it's the way they process information. Because we have to remember, writing is a memorial device. It's a mnemonic device. You know, you're remembering your thoughts on paper or an electronic form. And that's an electronic memorial or mnemonic device that you can use then later to write from. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing in the slightest. If it gets out of control, then you might have to find new ways to approach it. But do whatever works with your particular style of learning. And there are many ways people learn. There's not one way of learning. There's many, many ways. I see that. Mr. Rich B.O.B. I like Dr. Falk's style. I never thought of referencing the material before, just abbreviating. Of course, I ask myself questions while reading because you need to answer questions to learn. Well, you do. Absolutely. But as I said, I've gotten a lot of used books, and I've never seen it once where somebody, you know, actually referenced it in the actual page and the abbreviation of the note in the front. And then you always know where to find it. That's the other advantage. You always know where in the book to find the note. So it just makes things a lot faster and a lot quicker. So anyway, that's going to be the final question for the night. I want to thank everyone who's joined us tonight, and I want to remind everyone that we are going to be doing a YouTube premiere again Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific time, where we do not Aliens and the Lost Ark from the Ancient Aliens series from the History Channel. And we're going to have a premiere, so we're going to have a live chat. I'm going to be on the party, taking your comments live as we watch it. And I hope to see everybody there. And I want to, again, thank all our subscribers. I want to thank our super chatters tonight, who donated really, really generously. We really, really appreciate it, and we appreciate every question that is asked. And even if we didn't get to your question, we still appreciate the question. because it gives us a selection from which we can take questions to answer from. I also want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you have the chance, please become a Patreon supporter. You know, we don't have the huge rewards of, say, other channels, but Patreon does go directly into improving the quality of our videos. And I want to thank everyone who does take the time to view our videos, because it helps us, it helps the algorithm, and it's our way of giving to the community through knowledge. With that said, have a very great night. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.